For those unaware, there's currently a general election going on in the UK, and as someone interested in sport, I wanted to have a look at what the manifestos of each of the main parties were talking about when it comes to sport, and somehow the Conservatives win. That is if you count the amount of times the word sport appears in their manifesto. This is excluding the times where it says transport, because transport is not the same as sport. The Green Party have it in 20 times, the Liberal Democrats 11 times, Labour 4 times, and then Reform UK once. But of course, that doesn't really say much about what they're really talking about in the manifestos. Like with most of the manifestos, the parties are very similar in the very broad goals and aims they want to talk about. When it comes to sport, they want to get more people active, they want to bring in equality, so thinking about women and send individuals, but then also a focus on sports in media, so professional sports, buying tickets to go and watch sports or seeing sports on TV, or for those familiar with the football situation and the Super League, discussions about policies to prevent sports teams from going off and starting their own thing. The Conservatives mentioned their £320 million investment between 2021 and 2025 for the infrastructure of sport, that being grass pitches, multi-sports courts, leisure centres, swimming pools, those sorts of things, and they want to continue that. Quote, to build, renovate and maintain grass pitches and multi-sports facilities. What those finances look like, I'll get to later, but they also reference the £30 million Lionesses Future Fund, Lionesses being the England women's national team in football, alongside, quote, we will introduce laws to ensure our fans never again face the threat of clubs in England joining breakaway closed shop competitions and giving them more of a voice through independent football regulator. You may be able to see a trend that football being the main sport focused on in this manifesto. But for all of these manifestos, sport is put either with art and culture or on its own. However, in the text you can see that it's linked with education, specifically physical education. The Conservatives talking about having a mandatory 2 lessons a week in primary and secondary schools inside of school for PE, physical education. If we then take a look at the Green Party, they make a very bold claim in which they say 5 billion investment in community sports, arts and culture. However, they don't say how, when, or where this money is coming from, where it's going to, when it's going to be distributed through, whether it's 4 years, 1 year, 10 years, don't know. But in somewhat contrast, in at least the wording, the Green Party are focusing on participation, inclusion in physical activity, not just competitive sport. The Conservatives talking about talent and talent pathways and inter-school competitions, the Green Party focusing on allowing access to school sports facilities by local clubs and teams outside teaching hours to ensure maximum use of a valuable resource. Something someone as a sports coach who's trying to find a facility would really like to see, because schools just close at the end of the school day and there's a perfectly good hall there that I could use. And something unique to the Green Party, which you may have been able to guess, is their disdain for certain sports. A ban on all blood sports, including trial hunting, and strengthening and extending the 2004 Hunting Act. The Liberal Democrats also continue with wanting to increase physical activity and participation in sports by funding for facilities, etc, etc. But they also mention to protect lottery funding, and I'm not going to go into a funding of sport, but essentially without lottery funding, sports really struggle. And then alongside the diversity and inclusion of various individuals into physical activity and sport, like all of the other parties talk about, they also discuss expanding provision of extracurricular activities such as sport, music, drama, debating and coding, starting with a new free entitlement for disadvantaged children. So not just increasing PE in school time, but also extracurricular activities, i.e. sports after school. Now, Labour didn't have much to say about sport, but one thing they did say was, we will get more children active by protecting time for physical education and supporting the role grassroots clubs play in expanding access to sport. But apart from that, there's not really much else said. They do talk about tickets of professional games and watching major events, major sporting events, and then discussions about the governance of football, and then Super League reference points as well about whether professional teams are going to go elsewhere and change business and watching sport rather than participating in sport. But something I believe unique to Labour is they link sport with gambling and the idea of reducing gambling related to sports. Quote, Labour will reform gambling regulations, strengthening protections. We will continue to work with the industry on how to ensure responsible gambling. And the Reform Party just say they will protect country sports. That's it. Now, if we take some rough numbers, a multi-sports court facility costs around £200,000 to £300,000 a year just to maintain. That's not like replacing the roof or having a new court built or anything like that. There is more than 30,000 of these facilities in England, but if we say 30,000 and 200,000, just to be conservative with the numbers, that's more than £6 billion just to maintain the facilities that we have. Obviously, people using the facilities will contribute to paying that to maintain the facilities, but with a decrease in physical activity, partly due to the lockdowns, and also because people don't have the money to go and do the activities, the sports centres don't really have the money to keep themselves open. In 2021, there was an article published by the BBC about sports centres needing more money to stay open. That's 2021. Since then, the activity rates have increased, but there aren't as many volunteers because people don't have the time to volunteer. There aren't as many paid coaches because the clubs keep folding because they don't have the participants because people can't pay to take part, and the sports clubs are having to raise their prices because the sports facilities are having to raise the prices on rent because the cost of actually keeping the building up is going up. So everything is getting more expensive, even though the people that want to do the sport don't have the money to pay for it. So sport just isn't affordable. Physical activity, or organised physical activity, isn't really affordable in facilities, which means if clubs want to do any sort of sport, they either need to be kind of creative with the way that they're doing the sport or find funding from somewhere. Just a hint, funding is not easy to come by, especially now. And I recognise sport isn't high up on any of the parties' lists of things to focus on because economics is pretty important and all of the other topics that's being spoken about. However, mental health is discussed across the board. Health in general is discussed across the board. Supporting communities and cultures discussed across the board, and sport plays a key role in all of those things. I'm not saying sport should be number one or even in the top 5 areas, but having 4 mentions of the word sport in an entire manifesto seems a little rejecting.